Thank you. So we're going to move quickly right into the next panel. My name is Nicole Foster, and I'm from a company called Global Public Affairs. My firm does public affairs consulting in terms of integrated government relations, strategic communications, and issues management. I have the pleasure of introducing our panelists this morning, and the theme of this morning's discussion is really how you can use the subnational levels of government, so provinces or states, to really influence the bilateral relationship, and talking about some of those opportunities to do that. So our first, and both speakers I have said they're coming up to the podium, but I'll introduce them both to you and then they can come up. Speaker Chuck Perricone has worked at the interface of public and private sector relations in Canada and the United States for the majority of his career. As former Speaker of Michigan's House of Representatives, founder of the Perricone Group, and chairing the Trade Corridors Conference, Speaker Perricone has developed a reputation for having success in solving problems. In addition, he publishes Dome Magazine, which is an award-winning virtual publication that covers the people, issues, and events that shape state politics and policy, which I'm sure he'll touch on a little bit in his remarks. Our additional panelist, who I think is going to speak first, is Dan Klunzik, who is currently the Vice President of Nanos Research Corporation in North America. Many of you are already familiar with Nanos. It's a public opinion and market research firm that specializes in numbers-driven counsel to major organizations, mainly in the United States and Canada. Prior to his current role, Dan served as a political and economic relations officer with the Canadian Department of Foreign Affairs at the Canadian Consulate in Buffalo. So please join me in welcoming both panelists, and we will start with Dan. Thank you.
Thanks, folks. Thank you very much. Dan asked me to come up and give a quick presentation on a program that we developed while I was still at Buffalo, actually, and it's called the Binational Executive Seminar on Canada-U.S. Relations. First of all, what is the seminar? What is BES? Well, it's a professional development training program for political staff and legislators. Just very quickly, it's a university certificate program with an option to secure a graduate level credit. It's a 5-day intensive program located directly at the border. Takes place in Niagara Falls. The curriculum ranges across the full range of the Canada-U.S. relationship. And who are the teachers? Who are the faculty? Well, they're academics, but they also range across a variety of folks, diplomatic, private sector, and we call professional practitioners in the relationship. And really the purpose of the program is to build that capacity to have a better political management of the relationship. Most of us, I know a number of folks here, not everybody, does a lot of advocacy work. It is really a challenging environment to try and operate in with such a highly integrated relationship. Why was the program developed? Well, it's in response to the advocacy challenges in the Canada-U.S. relationship. As most of you know, many of you who practice in it, it's an issue-driven advocacy environment. You're dominated by problems of the moment, and when you go and try and do something in that context on the political side, there's a general lack of understanding of the complexities of the issues, but also the complexities of the interdependence that's actually in place. That interdependence is increasingly penetrating a wider context. And if you want to have a successful management, if you don't want to stumble into all of these challenges we get into, you need to have good decision making. Good decision making requires understanding of the context. I have to say, Ron Reines is, some of you know him, Ron Reines is a general manager of the Peace Bridge in Buffalo, Fort Erie. Really, this program was stimulated by a comment from Ron. He said, we asked him once from an academic perspective, what could the universities do to kind of help you in your daily work? And he said, well, I would like to not have to go through Canada-U.S. Relations 101 every time I speak with a legislative staffer. It takes time, it takes energy. You have to start from scratch and explain the entire context of the relationship. So that's really why the program's been developed. How does it work? Program candidates are nominated by embassy and consulate staff. So Canadian consulate and embassy staff in the U.S. nominate American candidates. U.S. embassy and consulate staff in Canada nominate Canadians. Target nominees include legislative and executive staff from across the federal, state, provincial level. All nominees receive a fellowship, and what does that practically mean? Everything is covered, meaning the cost of the program, their on-site accommodations, food, and so forth. They have to get there. The program does not cover their travel costs. The program looks for a balance of Americans and Canadians, but, and a good number is 14 to 18. Once you get over 18, it tends to be a little bit too big, although it can be accommodated. Practically, folks arrive late Sunday afternoon. They have a 5-day program. They depart early Friday afternoon. There's a graduate, all graduates receive a certificate, so it's a certificate program. It's issued jointly by the University of Buffalo and Brock University. And those that are really keen or want to actually are in other programs, they can receive graduate credit for this through the University of Buffalo. So, what's the curriculum? Well, it ranges across the full scope. In 5 days, it's difficult to do the entire range, but the curriculum is really focused not just on academics, although there are certainly academics involved. It's really looking at the political context of a lot of these issues, which we tend to not so much not do, but we don't really articulate them within the political dynamic. The challenge is, in many cases, folks think they understand context, but they really don't. Most Canadians think, and even political folks, think they understand Congress. They don't really understand it. They don't really know how Congress operates. Americans, if they give thought to how the political process works in Canada, they're not really aware. They are very different political institutions. We go through the whole context of that historical difference, why there's a difference, how it operates, so that they're able to actually articulate the language within the language they use in their daily contexts. It goes through a full range of issues, how the relationship is governed, what is NAFTA, what is the IJC. We have a diplomatic section where former ambassadors come together. There's a diplomatic roundtable. We have NORAD come in to talk about the military relationship. And we go through a whole envelope of policy issues. And when you're at the border, typically when you're at the border, you fall into the border black hole of only talking about the border. We try to avoid all of that, although being at the border, you're able to make use of not just the facilities, but being able to sensitize folks to what it actually means to move people and goods across that border. So, who are the best faculty? Well, while there's an academic core, there really is a broad constellation of folks that we bring in. It really is a blue ribbon panel of visiting faculty, as we call them. Certainly there's an academic foundation to all of this, but we bring in folks that actually deal with issues on a day-to-day basis. They're not coming in to advocate. They're not coming in to make sales. They're asked to come in and talk about these issues within a broader context, and as they can, within a political context. What are the benefits of the program? Well, really, the whole point of this is to build professional capacities for better decision-making. Embassies and consulates are benefited because they're cultivating and reinforcing their advocacy networks. They're identifying people that help them get their jobs done, but also need this kind of background. It really establishes a network of best fellows. There's a number of post-program opportunities that we'd like to build out. We have not done this yet, but you have a fellowship program that is able to take place after. Staffers are very mobile. They move in their careers. You never know where they're going to end up. We've got a best fellow that's now one of the chief lobbyists in Canada for the financial services industry. We've got a best fellow in the United States that was quite instrumental in the presidential campaign. So you never know from that room where people will end up, which adds to a certain amount of value. It offers actually visiting faculty, folks that come in, a unique place to connect and talk about things where they're not really able to do this in other contexts. So, and it's really the only program that focuses on the political dynamic of that relationship so that folks get to know each other and talk about those political issues. What are the program results to date? Well, really the program ran for 2 years, and it had improvements year over year. We have 27 best fellows, ranging from California to Maine and from Halifax to Vancouver. As a proof of concept, the program has been validated and confirmed. Since the consulate in Buffalo closed in 2012, we were essentially running the program out of the consulate. It's been on a slight hiatus. but we have established a new administrative home for the program. Presently, we're in the process of exploring renewed public and private sector partners and resources, and really we're looking to re-establish the program as a post-S.A.G.E proposal. The program has been very successful in place, and we're looking forward to seeing how we are able to reinvigorate it once the summit is done. I think we're targeting for next year. We typically do this in June, but we do need to get both the federal government on board, this is Canadian federal government, and some private sector folks behind it. And that's about it. Thank you. Happy to talk to any potential sponsors as well.
Good morning. Well, first I'd like to thank S.A.G.E, Dan, Cindy, and the founders, Dickinson Wright and the others, for this opportunity. This is just a fantastic venue. I think those cinnamon rolls were obscene, Dan, but we appreciate it anyway. I don't understand the Ohio State University. Is there another one? I've never understood that. And I didn't go to U of M. I was Western Michigan University, K College, so that's not the issue. I'm here to talk about Dome Magazine, but that's kind of indirectly, and it's going to be more or less a footnote in my mind. When I came out of the Speaker's office, well, let me back up a second. My last official act as Speaker was to bring the province of Ontario into S.A.G.E. We had the national conference in Detroit. It was a thrill. I absolutely loved it. My understanding is that I botched the toast in Windsor, something about, I was supposed to say something a different way about the Queen. I don't know. That's followed me for years. But that was very exciting despite that international misstep. But the other thing I had the opportunity to do was chair the Trade Corridors Conference, now defunct. But I learned a tremendous amount doing that, and also met many of the people in this room, including Dan and some others, and they've become good friends, and I very much appreciate that opportunity. I tend to be blunt when I speak. I don't do a lot of things very publicly. I do issue advocacy. I prefer the tougher issues. I have dealt with Canadian issues before, the single business tax, things like that. I had the opportunity a couple of times to assist with the orientation of the staffers before they were deployed in the U.S. With the Canadian consul. I'm not sure what we call that apparatus or that department, but when they do their week-long orientation, I'd pop in, talk about interacting with state legislatures, and that was very enjoyable, and the interaction was great. Very much enjoyed that. So I have some Canadian clients. I do have a great deal of familiarity, and I'd like to expand that base. To that point, I've been around this issue for about 20 years now, and there are some fundamental points that I'd like to make that, frankly, I think we've missed, and I share Dan's frustration and that of many of you. We just keep doing the same thing the same way, and given the level of intelligence, I don't understand why, because we're not getting the results we should be achieving. You have the facts on your side. The story's always been correct. You know these details better than anyone else alive. You can articulate them in your sleep. You could probably boil it down to a 3-level elevator ride. And yet, we continue to talk about the same hurdles year after year after year. This is the same thing, by the way, that plagues the Mackinac Island Conference in Michigan. Once it's over, it's over. Legislators go back. Sometimes they hear a few things, but every year they tend to talk about the same things. Now, they've beefed up their attempts to follow up and build upon, but from the legislative perspective, which is where I come from, my experience, not much has changed. Now, term limits, those doors are revolving so quickly that doesn't really carry on as much, but we're down to only 15 states with term limits, so that's not necessarily an excuse anymore. My point is that we're talking to the wrong people. We continue, as I said last night, to speak to the staff and the bureaucrats. That's important. You have to keep them up to speed. They tend to be the institutional knowledge. They are the ones that administer and implement on a day-to-day basis. No question. The problem is they have their own culture. and it's slower than academic university culture. It takes forever, and there's no oversight because they've got half the world coming through their doors. So you are really stuck when you're working that angle. Does it need to be a layer that you deal with? Absolutely. But it shouldn't be your point of leverage because it can't be, and it never will be. And I would submit we have proven that ourselves. The other thing is we're speaking the wrong way. International issues are sexy to state legislators. When they come in from day one, they are culturally informed and kept within their sandbox. You don't do anything outside the state border, federal trumps. No, that's not you, that's another state, that's the feds. Get back into your corner. That's the way it is under state capitol domes. Yes, they're seeing more in the news. Yes, they may be getting more visits. Yes, they're more aware of Canada, US, and we're the largest trading partners, yada, yada, yada. They know all that. Their problem is on a day-to-day basis, awash in this sea of information, and they've got even more coming at them than they did 5 and 10 years ago, just like you and I do, is they don't know what to do with it. And if you tell them anything else, they're going to forget their locker combination. So you should never leave an office with a legislator. I don't care what chamber you are, health association, doesn't matter. If you are going in simply to introduce yourself to a legislator in their office, you are not maximizing your opportunity, period. And that's what most everyone does. And when they leave, and I speak to legislators all the time. I'm part of the family, former speaker, I can go anywhere, get in. Nobody ever asked me what party I was in. Believe it or not, it's true. And the reason is because the culture is so unique. It's like being a CEO or an executive director with an organization. You know when the door closes and you're speaking to a peer, the first thing they do is they exhale and they tell you their latest frustration. Why? Because they know you understand it. They know you won't talk about it out of school. And you're the only person they can talk to. Many times they can't talk to staff. They can't take it home, so they just bottle it up. Well, my gosh, if you're a CEO and you've got another one walking in, it's just like with legislators talking to each other. It takes a while to get past the banter to the point where you can talk about the issue you're even there for. It's the same thing around the country and in any capital. So I do feel confident in what I'm saying here is in terms of accuracy and import from that standpoint. When you come in from another country or another country's interest, that's something that stays in their mind for a while. You better have an ask, and you better have something to go with it, whatever it is, not just an introduction. You want an introduction, go to a reception or put one on yourself. You'll get more of their attention that way. It may cost you a little bit more money, but when you're in their offices, they're thinking about the last phone call, the next phone call, the staffer's knocking at the door, and they've got session that day, committee that day, they've got 53 other things they need to be thinking about. That's not the best place for you to be. There's different ways to do that. The other issue is your typecast. Again, whether you're a chamber, a business, some kind of social assistance program, doesn't matter which end of the political spectrum, anyone that goes in their office is already typecast. They think about who you are, who you're representing, where you're from, why are you here. Everything you say to them after you leave, they're taking internally and they're running it by somebody else for translation. Question I get most often from legislators when I come in, hey, X and Y happened. What's really going on there? What do I need to know? And that's because the number one concern in the mind of any elected official is risk. It's all about the risk. They don't want to get in trouble. They don't want to do anything that's going to be embarrassing. They don't want to make a mistake. I don't care how new they are. I don't care what level of veteran level they are. The veterans just are better at typecasting. By the way, they're the ones that teach the newer members how to typecast. That's the way the ball rolls, and that's what you're up against every time you go in. And then finally, it's how you speak to these people. So we've talked about risk, but you also have to understand that these folks are in a bubble. When you're talking to staff and bureaucrats, I don't care if you've known them for 20 years. I was a legislator. I was a tax chair as a freshman. I got lucky. I was the guy that was the vice chair of the committee when the chair ran for a special in the Senate, got elected, bumped up, there's a vacancy. My speaker was forward-thinking enough to say, term limits is coming, give the new kid a chance. and he bumped me up. Well, in some respects, it was a nightmare. In other ways, it was a great opportunity. I'm a student of the process. I've always paid attention to how things work and why. I knew I didn't want to be in it for life. I left after the House with an open Senate seat. I didn't have any interest in that part of it. I miss caucus. Those are the kinds of things I miss. I miss finding talent, putting it in a position where it could develop. That's the greatest rush I've ever experienced. Those are the things I think about. So John Engler taught me, without knowing it, we weren't close. I got in the way of taking over the Detroit Metro Airport. He taught me that you don't build a coalition, you eliminate the obstacles. The water flows, the coalition will form. It's much faster. Those, I tell new members all the time, it's not what the press reports, it's what they don't report. That's what you need to keep in mind, and that's more so true today than it ever was. It's a shortcut, and that's my point. Elected officials are a shortcut to what you're trying to do. They control the budget. When they call with a request, it is more than noted by the bureaucrats and the staff, no matter where they're at. It's discussed. It's, why would you get a call from Representative or Senator so-and-so? Why would that happen? I don't understand this. Things take place as a result of calls and questions. If it gets real slow, then they call a hearing. You know, hearings don't hurt anybody. But you got to have that check and balance piece. You've got to add that accountability. Now, the way you do that is communicating to the legislators the right way, and we haven't done a real good job of that. We go in and we introduce, we talk about the import and the size of our trading relationship, and we assume that because we're the biggest and we're neighbors and they need to know this, that they're going to connect all the dots and realize, wow, that needs to be a priority. I need to do X, Y, and Z. But what did you forget? You forgot that they are educated to believe that they have no role in international policy, period. So you've got to come at it a different way with the specifics that you're after. And, you know, I do a lot of different things, but the bottom line is I translate. That's what I spend my time doing. And it's not difficult to do because others don't. I go in after these different groups that spend all this money on government relations staff, doing the same thing the same way, and they have been for decades. I'm the only one on the stage that's talking their language, and it's not hard to do. It really is. It's just a different culture. And that's the message I wanted to share. So that takes me to Dome. Why did I buy Dome? Dome is a internet publication, virtual. It's small. We've got about 3,000 readers. They are all over the country. I'm not quite sure why, I have to be honest. I went to Albany and talked to a few folks. There was some advice with some people that were running for leadership. I do a lot of that because it's bipartisan. Doesn't get me into the majority battles because it's internal leadership races. And I was surprised by the number of people that read Dome. I've got a Pulitzer Prize winner. I've got 2 Emmy winners. It's a rotating core of columnists. I am going to expand to other states. We're looking at Columbus right now. But I didn't even buy it for that content. I bought it because I wanted the platform for programming. So the reason that Dan thought it would be good for me to come here and talk about Dome is because we do a program every 2 years for all the newly elected members, and I put them alone with their leadership. Party has nothing to do with it. It's bipartisan, and they talk to each other. Now, I structure it. There are specific points of interest that if I know major issues are coming up, then we'll go ahead and do that. But we've had some great victories out of this. The Bipartisan Caucus was created in 2011 at one of our conferences. Last time we had the Consul General from Canada and from Mexico present. I was able to get a public commitment from leadership that they would create trade committees. Now, they don't call them trade committees alone. They're trade and development or things like that, House and Senate, but the point is they created them and they're using them, and there's now a place for people like you to go to speak about those issues, when prior, I've been working on this since 2000, I couldn't get a leader to commit. With both countries represented and those leaders in the room, I basically put them on the spot, and it worked. And now we've got those created, and they won't go away. So those are opportunities as well. We just started a new breakfast program. It sounds simple. But rather than have business interests sit up front, and they sponsored the event, the legislators are asked by someone not in the system, tell us what's going on, what about this issue, they talk for a while, you have pancakes, you leave. We actually interact. The legislators love it, because my whole credo with Dome is full context. You tell your story, most importantly, tell the CEOs why you're doing what you're doing. In the private sector, that's the most common question I get. Why are they doing this? Why did they do it that way? Always. And you don't read that in the press anymore, especially because everyone's had to cut as much as they have. So we try to bridge that, and of course, for marketing purposes, we do it at the right time. So we had our first, we launched just last week prior to the summer recess. It was 2 days before they left. Appropriations were winding down. We had a lot of controversy over the Detroit public school bailout, et cetera, et cetera. And we're coming back in the fall. We'll do the election, lame duck, and then we'll roll into this conference that Dan attended and enjoyed. So there are other things coming with Dome, but that's why I bought it. A platform, become a resource, interact. And I just wanted to share the message that your issues make sense. And I know the state legislators want to do it. And I know that the state legislators will get it done and will impact federal policy, because that's where the members of Congress look to see who's challenging them. They're the people on the ground, and the state legislators will leverage, because they're the eyes and ears for the Congress members that are remote, a long ways away, and not in the day-to-day media traffic and with the voters and the donors and everyone else. The interest is there, the hunger is there, and the need for the knowledge you have is there, and I hope we can make that change. Thank you.
Thank you. So the three of us are basically in the persuasion business of one kind or another, and so our kind of agenda for this panel is to persuade you that there's a lot of relevance at the subnational level in terms of influencing what's happening in the bilateral relationship. And almost to prove our point, Ontario's Premier Kathleen Wynne happens to be traveling throughout the U.S. right now. She spent yesterday in Detroit, and she met with Governor Snyder. Today she's in Washington, and she'll be talking about softwood lumber and the dairy industry, and then tomorrow she's in Boston, and she will be promoting the financial services sector and meeting with Governor Baker. So she's the perfect sort of case in point about what's happening. I'll say a couple short words about what's happening in Canada and the federal-provincial dynamic. There is a lot. Provinces do have quite a bit of influence on the federal agenda, and going into sort of what's happening in terms of the next discussions around NAFTA, different provinces will have different agendas, and some of those will win, and some of those will maybe not be as prominent in the discussion. A key priority for British Columbia is softwood lumber and nothing but, and so each province will have its own voice, and it's also interesting to understand that different provinces will have more influence over the federal government at a different time. Right now, Ontario is particularly influential. Prime Minister Trudeau's, both his principal secretary and chief of staff were formerly in the Ontario Liberal government, and Kathleen Wynne's chief of staff happens to have been a chief of staff when Stéphane Dion was leader of the opposition in the federal party. And so those are just three examples. There are multiple examples of where there's a strong intertwining of the staff. Federally and provincially, they also share the same riding. So there's all kinds of discussion that happens between the federal and provincial levels, particularly in Ontario, but that happens in a lot of provinces as well. So there are fantastic opportunities to influence this sort of what happens at the national level from the provincial governments, and how that kind of takes place in sort of the international bilateral relationship as well. And even from a structural point of view, we have a lot of the provinces now have specific representatives in some of the Canadian embassies, just to make sure that those specific linkages are made. So, gentlemen, can I ask you? Oh, no. Okay.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to cut because of a panel and then lunch. But a key part of what we're attempting to do at the summit is talk about what the advocacy strategy will look like, and this tees up the issue. And then we will carry it forward tomorrow as we get together on what the next steps will be as we try to coordinate our various advocacy efforts, because we have to get our advanced manufacturing panel on right now because of some travel schedules, and then we'll roll into lunch. But keep in mind, we wanted to introduce these folks to you because these are key people that are leading many of the various programs that we're talking about. So please, as you mingle around lunch throughout the afternoon and into tomorrow, make sure that you're talking to those folks with any key ideas and beyond. So with that, we got to wrap it up.
Thank you.